Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's Daily Word. Today is Friday, October the 8th of the year 2021. Glad you could join me for a few minutes together as we end this first full week of the month of October. A little rainy out there this morning. I was blessed early this morning to go have breakfast with Dustin and Carter and Hudson, and that was a fun thing to do this morning. And we were at Perkins and having breakfast, and some folks came in that we knew. I'm not going to give them up. Some folks came in that we knew, and well, that I knew actually. And we talked to them. They kind of sat across from us. And when it came time to leave, the waitress said to us that our breakfast had been paid for. And so I said, "Was it so and so?" She said, "Well, I'm not allowed to tell you, but..." So I knew it was them, and that's a pretty cool thing when that happens. They bought our breakfast, and so we certainly appreciated that this morning. And so we gather again to talk about our daily word and to share our lives together, to be in this form of community that we share together, and to talk about our daily word and what it might mean for us. So for this morning, I've chosen from the scripture this morning from Psalm 31, verse 9. And we hear this. And I'm going to use a couple other verses later, but Psalm 31, verse 9 to begin this morning. Be gracious to me, O Lord, for I am in distress. My eye wastes away from grief, my soul and body also. So last night I was at Fairlawn High School, and I was there for senior night. Senior night for soccer, senior night for golf and cross country and volleyball players. And so the night before, I didn't realize that it was senior night for soccer because of my inability to walk where the soccer field is. I haven't gone to soccer this year. Usually I do and do the announcing and introduce the lineups, but the night before, about 8 o'clock, the principal called me and said, "So Jim, tomorrow night is soccer, senior night, and they really want you to come do that. Is there a way that you can make that happen?" And I said, "Yep." So I parked really close, and I went to the soccer field first, and there are 8 soccer seniors, and I was able to share in their senior celebration, introduce them, and talk a bit about them. And then when that got done, I got in my car and drove up to the school and went into the gym. And between the JV and the varsity match, we celebrated one senior golfer who actually qualified for the state yesterday, and 2 cross-country runners, and 6 varsity volleyball players. And so one of the things that happens, if you remember those senior times, that I read a bit about them, introduce them and their parents, and they walk across the floor. And one of the things that we do that I think is cool, and I'm sure other schools do it as well, is that before I introduced our seniors, I introduced the opponent's seniors. And we happened to be playing Botkins last night. And so I introduced the Botkins seniors, and we gave all of them a gift. I think that's a pretty cool thing. So one of the things about senior night for parents and for the athletes is that it's rather emotional, right? There's grief that's attached to it, mostly from the parents, but also from some of the athletes. And I noticed last night that when the varsity players came to the middle of the floor to do the captain and do the coin toss, that all of our seniors had these big tears streaming down their face because, for them, it's a moment in time. It is a sense of grief in their life, and this idea that, life is moving on, and that this part of their life is about to change for them. I thought about that in reference to the scripture and how grief, plays a role in our lives. Parents tell you, my parents told me, and I told my kids, enjoy the moment, it goes by really fast. You don't. You don't enjoy the moment. It does go by really fast, and it's after the fact that you enjoy the moment of what's happening in your life. Most of us who are together today are older. We have this frame of reference for grief that's different than those kids that I helped to honor last night. We, mourn, we grieve the death of friends and family, and then we also grieve, the person that we once were. We can't do the things we used to do. This last 18 plus months, whether we'd like to admit it or not, they've taken a toll on our lives. We haven't been able to do the things we want to do. We've felt confined, and the grief that surrounds that, I think, is a palpable grief, and one that I think that we have to in our lives acknowledge and to wrestle with and to figure out where it is that we are in our lives. So I got to thinking about the kids last night. So they have this ability, those senior volleyball players have this ability, they went from the grief and the crying to then warming up and being able to play volleyball, and how quickly they could change their emotion from one of grief and sorrow and probably some joy to one of competitiveness and being able to play volleyball. And they played really well, and we won in 3 sets, and it was an impressive thing. I wonder for us, when we look at our lives, what are the things in our lives that we are mourning in this season of life? The scripture says to us, "Be gracious to me, O Lord, for I'm in distress. My eye wastes away from grief. My soul and body also." The psalmist, had this deep recognition that in all of our life we have the thing that's about grief and about how it affects our lives, and how it is that in all of that, we have in us grief and life changes. I think a lot about that. Carter, this morning, we were sitting back in the booth, and of course he's 4, he'll be 4 soon, and he had to go to the bathroom. And so Dustin was sitting with Hudson. I said, "So, Carter, can Pawpaw take you?" "Yep." I said, "Okay." Well, of course, he's sitting on the inside of me, and he's scooting me out. "Go, Pawpaw, gotta poop. Go, Pawpaw, gotta go." So we finally got out, and we made our way, and he kept walking ahead and turning around and seeing if I was coming. And I thought about that, how slow I am, and I just can't keep up, and I grieve that, this idea of the loss in my life. And I think for all of us, it would do us good, to sit and explore, to think about and lament the important losses in our life, and to be honest about that, and to pour it out to God, and to be reminded about what the psalmist knows for us and what the psalmist understood about grief in our lives. But then, I keep reading this psalm, and you get to the very last verse, and I think this is important. The very last verse says, "Be strong and let your heart take courage, all you who wait for the Lord." You see, there is in our lives a sense of grief and a sense of loss. And sometimes grief, as the psalmist describes, fills our eyes, and we're not sure what to do with it, and we lament the loss of that. But then there is this also the end: "Be strong and let your heart take courage, all you who wait for the Lord." And friends, as we live our lives in these days, these continued difficult pandemic days, yesterday in Sydney, we were in a bit of a state of disbelief. The night before, a police officer had been shot. I know that happens in other cities. It doesn't really happen in Sydney. A police officer was shot, had to be care flighted, and the person who done it was on the run. And so we had gotten a call. We got a call at the church to make sure that we just stayed inside. And so there was that bit of apprehension until this person was caught, and they were thankfully caught yesterday. And thankfully, the officer is going to recover and do well, it sounds like. You think about that, and And you wonder about all this idea that grief, strikes up in us, and fear, if you will, about what's happened in our lives. And we all have that. Um, the seniors last night have a bit of that grief and they overcome it. Parents last night who walked across the floor or across the soccer field have a bit of grief. They overcome it. And you and I, in all the grief of our lives, some of it's about death. Some of it's about where, all the losses that we have, and others are just, some of our grief's just about the loss of who we used to be, and the loss of, for me and for even maybe for you, the loss of my physical stature. I feel like I'm half the person physically that I used to be, and it's such a struggle. I feel like if somebody took a hold of my body, you could just break me in half. That's really how I feel. It's so fragile. Um, but then there's this reminder in the midst of grief. The psalmist says, "Be strong and let your heart take courage, all you who wait for the Lord." You see, friends, for us, in the midst of all of life's changes, we're called to be strong and take heart, and to wait for God's presence in our lives, and to know that God is present with us in powerful ways. I in the midst of my grief, having breakfast with my boys today was a powerful thing. Having someone buy our breakfast this morning was a really good thing. And so, in all of our lives, I pray that we'll find in the midst of it hope, recovery from grief and anxiety and fear, knowing that God's presence is with us always in powerful ways, and that you and I should really be strong and have courage in all of our lives. I think that's a good way for us to end our week together. So, I look forward to seeing you Sunday morning at 10:15. We'll share and worship together. Sunday morning for you St. Paul's folks is our noisy bucket offering. So I invite you to bring your loose change and to drop that in the buckets in the narthex. We'll worship together at 10:15, either in person or here on Facebook Live. And then we'll gather again for our daily word on Monday morning at 10 o'clock. Have a great day and a great weekend.